Can you see the slides?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Reggie.
So I can't make it a slide. Is
You
not
put it
working.
slideshow
Yeah, slideshow.
on the lower part. Lower part you can see the. On the lower side.
Right.
There's a trophy there. Last one. Next to 111%.
There is something. 1 second.
Or
Yeah.
above
Okay.
you can. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
fine.
Fine. So let's begin the panel. I request all the panelists to keep a finger on your mute button to avoid voice clash. And as all of you know that for centuries, science has ignored the potential of role of male partner because of the default assumption that always the woman is at fault. So this lead to a neglected male, and the male part of infertility was not much of researched, and it is still underdiagnosed and undertreated. So this will be the outlining of our panel discussion. And because of this andrological ignorance and misogynistic attitude of the society, the male factor infertility is still underdiagnosed and undertreated. So I would like to ask Sheila Madam to start the discussion. So whether there is any need for investigating a male. Madam?
Yes. Thank you, Reggie. Definitely there is a need to investigate the male. I think as we all know, we start investigating the couple together. So the most important thing would be a proper history. I think a reproductive history is sexual and reproductive history is very, very important. So taking I think you'll be coming to that, but covering all the things in the sexual history, infections, surgery, anything, drugs, substance abuse, all those things. So that would be in the history. And then the investigation, which I might, sort of defer for some time. If after the history, probably a semen analysis, I would do a semen analysis. And then if there is anything, ideally, probably you could do a physical examination also at the same time. Or the European Association also recommends that you do, I think the American Fertility Association recommends that you do the examination together with the history. But otherwise, what you could do is take a proper history and ask for a semen analysis. And if anything is abnormal in the history, anything means any surgery, any medical disorders, sexual problems, anything like that, or the semen analysis, you find any abnormality, ask for do a clinical examination. Or you can do the clinical examination along with it. But definitely, yes, the male is to be given equal importance with the female.
Thank you, ma'am. So basically, we need to examine, or we have to take a detailed history of the male to restore the normal fertility. Second thing is whether he can become a biological father for in future. And third thing is to identify the genetic cause of male infertility. And the most important thing, that is the medical conditions like testicular tumor, or there's 1% of male infertility patient can have a potential fatal disorder. So as Madam rightly told, you have to investigate the male and female in a parallel way. So this is another interesting thing that is called the Charlson's comorbidity index. So this predicts 10-year survival in patients with multiple comorbidities, and they have involved both FSH and the deterioration of semen parameters, okay, as a marker of poor health. So coming to the next question, that is, and I think Biju can take. So how, as Madam already told, how will you evaluate a male factor infertility?
I think that first and foremost, I always ask them the sexual history. Then,
yes, Biju.
Yeah, first I ask them always the sexual history, whether how often he comes home, because most of the people, they say they're staying together. When we take the history, we come to know that he comes once in a week or alternate weeks. Then second thing is like one good semen analysis must, if their sexual history is good, if they're having regular intercourse, then go for some analysis or 1 or 2 some analysis report. Then third thing is like if anything abnormally, I usually go for a physical examination of the husband.
Okay.
Of the main thing is their sexual history. I always look into, because most of the males nowadays they have erectile dysfunction due to their stress, and even especially this COVID era, many of them have this problem. And second thing is medical history. I do ask, because what I see is that 50% of the male patient who comes to me is that diabetic. We know that Kerala is a general population, diabetic history is, diabetic cases are more. Then that's a routine thing. Then that's all. That much.
So very valid point, especially in the increasing incidence of non-communicable diseases like hypertension and diabetes. So what about Anupama? Can you tell about the paternal age and its implications on in the history?
Yeah, definitely. Previously, we were thinking only the maternal age is important regarding the incidence of chromosomal abnormalities and other genetic problems in the offspring or the babies. But now the male age, the paternal age is also equally important. And another importance of the paternal age is nowadays what we have seen in our routine practice, the remarriages, marriages in old age. Marriages approaching 50s and all those things are very common in nowadays. That is what we see in present day couple. So definitely the paternal age definitely carries very much importance, and moreover it can lead on to various autosomal dominant, single gene autosomal dominant conditions like achondroplasia, autism, and a lot of issues in the babies, as well as of course lead on. Maternal age itself can lead on to infertility, miscarriages and recurrent miscarriages, a lot of morphological abnormalities for the sperms, and as such a lot of miscarriages and other issues in the couple. So definitely the paternal age carries very much importance in the current scenario. And
I think Biju has already told about the sexual history, and you have to specifically ask about the libido, about any lubricant use, about the ejaculation, whether they are going for a timed intercourse, frequency of intercourse. These are all very important while taking history. So again, in the developmental history, that is regarding the sexual development, again, if suppose the patient is having a subfertility or a severe OAT, anything specific in the sexual developmental history? Anupama or Preeta can take.
yeah.
Anupama, yes.
Yeah, definitely the development history has to be properly taken from the male partner. So there can be history of undescended testes and improper correction, or approximately the improper timing of correction of undescended testes has been seen even nowadays. So maybe due to lack of knowledge of the family members, then that is another issue. Then history of any injuries to the testes and testicular torsion and all those injuries, and some surgeries related to the testes in the childhood. And of course, a lot of new diseases are coming, and a lot of smoking, use of all those things in the adolescent age is upcoming nowadays. So all these things carries importance. At the same time, following previously the incidence of mumps were very common in our society, but nowadays I think the incidence has reduced, but still the mumps infections, like viral infections like mumps can, of course, as we all know, that can lead on to testicular atrophy and can produce a higher percentage of infertility. And as the previous speaker pointed out, a lot of sexually transmitted infections, other genitourinary tract infections leading on to prostatitis and other testicular infections, and all those things are very much increasing in the current situations. And so definitely, especially in our youngsters, the premarital relationships and extramarital relationships and all those things are going in a simple way. So definitely we have to look into the sexually transmitted infections and all those things.
So again, I want to stress 3 points. Thank you, Anupama. One thing is the correction of the undescended testis. That is the orchiopexy to be done before the damage occurs to the testis. Second thing is again regarding torsion and testicular trauma, whether there should not be any breach in the blood testis barrier, and the time of torsion and the intervention, that is also very important. Third thing is mumps orchitis. Again, the occurrence of the orchitis in the if it is in the pubertal age and all, there is a chance of 40 to 70% mumps orchitis, and following that the testicular atrophy. So regarding personal history, Biju has told about diabetes, cirrhosis, hypertension and all. you have to ask about the surgeries, especially inguinal-scrotal surgeries, retroperitoneal, TURPs, all this can cause problems in the kid. I think Preeta can take this question. What about the newer, any problem with the drugs, chemicals, and the newer endocrine disrupting chemicals? Preeta?
Yeah. Endocrine disrupting, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Endocrine disrupting chemicals, one of the most, nowadays it's told that the semen parameters, quality is coming down mainly because of the atmospheric pollutants. It's also because of the occupational exposure also. This is mainly because all these exposure things like whether it is pesticides, alcohol, what is mentioned, cocaine, all these recreational drugs, all these things, and drugs they are using, all these things can, it is said that the testosterone is converted to estrogen, that is why the semen parameters or the quality of the semen parameters or spermatozoa is coming down because of this. So the mainly the endocrine disrupting chemicals are all the what is that occupational things, the things what we are using, that is all the plastic materials what we are using, then all that even the radiations which they are most of the people are using laptops and all computers, mobiles and all these things, and the radiations which they are exposed to, all these things are the chemicals or whatever radiations which can disrupt the normal endocrine factors of the men, and that is how that semen parameters or the quality of the semen parameters are coming down.
Thank you, Dr. Preeta. This is a big menace to the society. You know
Yes.
that almost 50% reduction in when you compare the semen analysis of in 1950s and 2020, there is almost a 50% reduction in the quality and the quantity of the semen. So this is one of the main factors. Everywhere it is there, in the sales receipts, in the plastic bottles, everywhere the EDCs are there, and this has reduced the quality of the semen. So again, family history and current health status also is very important. So Cyriac, can you talk something about this recreational drugs, alcohol and smoking? Dr. Cyriac?
Yeah, smoking definitely causes impairment in the sperm production. And if you are a passive smoker, not even an active smoker, even if you are a passive smoker, also it can cause the problem with the spermatogenesis. Alcohol to a small limit, it doesn't cause any problem, but on high intake of alcoholism, even that can interrupt with the spermatogenesis and result in low semen parameters. About the recreational drugs, definitely some drugs like cocaine, marijuana, and all those things also can reduce the spermatogenesis. Altogether, any habits, the tobacco associated habits basically, and even gutka and all those habits is definitely a problem. Some patients, because of the stress of their job also, I think we should, they will be going on taking all these drugs or recreational drugs, which we have to be very careful. And by history taking, we can find all these things, and they all affect the spermatogenesis.
Thank you, Cyriac. Another important thing is the AADs, that is the anabolic androgenic steroids. So people used to go to gyms, and usually the young generation used to go to the gym, and the gym instructor will tell that you take this drug to increase your muscle mass and all. So what happens actually is this is going to have a negative feedback on the hypothalamo-pituitary gonadal axis, and it causes a reversible suppression of the spermatogenesis, and it causes testicular atrophy and infertility. So you can see almost all those muscular men with small testes and all. I had a patient recently with he's a gym instructor, and he used to take anabolic steroids and all, and he has got a very bad sperm parameters. So definitely this AAS should be highly discouraged. And you are a person who is doing bariatric surgeries and all. What about obesity?
Yes. Obesity definitely has a high impact on semen parameters, and even we have seen those patients. Even I had one of my relatives who is in Dubai, and when initially both husband and wife, they both were obese. We asked them to reduce weight, and his count initially was very low, and then by reduction of weight, he had better semen parameters. They conceived naturally. Second time he tried to reduce weight, and he couldn't reduce weight, and the semen parameters were really bad, and then he had to undergo bariatric surgery, which we did, and then he had a very good count following the bariatric surgery, and they again conceived naturally, and again the third time they conceived again naturally. So they have 3 kids now. So that shows that obesity has definitely an impact on fertility. And we have seen many patients who are azoospermic. Once they reduce weight, there is presence of sperm in the semen. Definitely, that shows that obesity has got an impact on semen parameters, and even DNA fragmentation is high with obesity.
So as rightly told by the previous speaker, Dr. Venugopal, there is definitely there is an alteration in the testicular estrogen ratio, and this may be one of the reasons for the bad semen parameters in obesity. So definitely the lifestyle modification and reduction of BMI can help in improving the semen parameters. So another important thing is psychological stress, already told by one of the panelists. And what about, again, co-siblings, again, you have to ask about any cystic fibrosis, cryptorchidisms, Y microdeletions, Klinefelters and all. So coming to physical examination, Ram, I think Ram Gopal can take, how will you go ahead with your physical examination of a male partner? So you have taken a good history, then you have done a semen analysis, and semen analysis has got some alterations, and you are going ahead with a physical examination.
After the minimum initial examination, which includes a proper history and a detailed semen analysis in an accredited lab, if there is anything wrong with those results or with the history, we can go directly to the physical examination. Physical examination, we should cover all the systems basically, followed by local examination. The local examination should include 6 points at least. You should give importance to the penis, where is the urethral meatus is present, and whether there is any abnormal curvature. Then importance of palpation and finding out the volume of the testis, then finding out details about the vas and epididymis. Then you should rule out varicoceles, and you should be able to do a prostate examination if necessary in some patients. In the general examination, you should look out for secondary sexual characters development. Already you already having taken the developmental history earlier. With that, you should correlate. Then secondly, body hair and facial hair and chest hair distribution, and rule out gynecomastia. So these are the basic things to be excluded in examination, and you should talk to the patient and confirm that he has a normal erection and an ejaculation. Even though in semen analysis and on appearance everything will appear normal, many people will not be able to have a normal erection and ejaculation, especially in the presence of the partner. He might be able to produce a sample and he will give it to you in the lab, but then in presence of the partner there might be other problems which will not be able to find out.
Okay, thank you, Ram. And especially the size of the testis is very important, as this slide shows that the seminiferous tubules constitutes 85% of the testicular volume, and if there is a decrease in the volume, it implies the loss of germinal epithelium. Definitely you have to look for the vas difference, and or all the others. Suppose if there is CBAVD, and you have to look for renal agenesis, other system, the involvement of other systems also. So what about varicocele, Dr. Krishnadas?
Well,
Krishnadas,
clinical examination still, yes, clinical examination still remains the mainstay for diagnosis of varicocele. In any varicocele with a normal semen parameter need not be taken significantly when you compare it with a semen parameter that shows subabnormality at one level or the other, especially with closer look on motility and morphology. So grades of varicocele, grade 1, 2, and 3. Subclinical varicocele may not be always palpable, but any clinically palpable varicocele, yes, it should be taken seriously, especially in correlation with what the semen shows. So yes, examination has to be done in a detailed manner. Yes.
Previous speakers, especially Jayashwan sir and Venu sir, told that it is better to do a varicocele surgery when there is an OAT. Do you agree with that?
Well, if you had followed them very closely, they had said that in certain specific situations, certain clients may be benefited. That was very in the reading between the lines that they mentioned. Whom to choose surgery for and whom not to choose surgery for is something that has to be decided for. Yes, it has definitely got a beneficial role for certain subset of patients, but not for all.
Okay. I think we will go on to the semen analysis, and Hari will be moderating the session on semen analysis. Hari?
Raji, Ram was going to tell something regarding the varicocele.
Yes, Ram.
One small point regarding varicocele and OAT. Just wanted to add to what Dr. Krishnadas was telling. Not in all patients with OAT we need to do varicocele. If there's varicocele and the patient semen analysis is not so bad, you don't have to do. If they are able to conceive within 3 to 6 months or if it is improving with antioxidants, there is no point in doing. If within 3 to 6 months there is no improvement or no pregnancy or repeated pregnancy failure, then we will think about doing.
Sheila madam, your opinion?
I think the same thing. Subclinical varicoceles, I think I feel very strongly. You should not be doing Dopplers and then searching for varicoceles and operating. So only if it's a palpable varicocele with an abnormal semen analysis, I would agree. Then, of course, but as he said, you can wait for some time, 3 to 6 months, and see if they're going to conceive, and then only do it. Or else, even if it's, there is increased DNA fragmentation and oxidative stress or something, if you're able to measure it, and then you find a large varicocele, probably that might be a place. But otherwise, not routinely. And if you do it, probably a microsurgical approach would be better, if possible.
One more point. If you feel that the semen is going to get degraded over time, you can give them an option of storing the sample also.
Easy, correct.
Hari?
Raji, one more thing. Actually, there are a few papers from the American side. They're doing varicocelectomy for azoospermia before going for the ART. But actually, if you go through these papers, almost all of them are coming from the US side. But European side, most of them are very conservative and still they follow the guidelines. But still ASRM guidelines strictly say no varicocelectomy for these conditions.
Especially from the Cleveland Clinic, I think Ashok Agarwal is doing a lot of work in antioxidants and this thing. And they are advocating this varicose surgery for reducing the, again, you have to take it with a pinch of salt. Okay. To reduce the oxidative stress and improve the outcome of IVF treatment, especially ICSI.
We need no research.
Okay. Hari?
Yeah, thank you, Raji. Like, semen analysis is considered to be the simpler test of male infertility, and it gives a lot of information regarding sperm production, patency of the male genital tract, and accessory gland function and the ejaculative function. But since it is very cheap, relatively cheap compared to the other tests in the fertility business, so we came to believe that it's easy to perform since it comes at a lower price. In reality, actually, it is easy to perform it badly and requires skill and expertise. So I may ask Dr. Ram Gopal, what instructions will you give a patient before he go for the semen collection?
First of all, we will counsel the couple together and we will give instructions to the male partner alone also. First will be about the abstinence period, which should be ideally between 3 to 5 days. And the aseptic precautions which he has to undergo while collecting a sample. And if he is not able to collect it near the laboratory in the hospital premises, then only we will allow him to do a home collection. And if a home collection is being done, the importance of asepsis and the importance of maintaining the temperature while being transported to the hospital is mentioned, and that all the containers should be pre-weighed and should have the patient's name and any 1 or 2 unique ID codes which won't get mistaken. And the sample is being brought from outside, the examination should start within 1 hour of collection of the sample. And you should get a consent from the patient that this is that patient sample. That also might help.
Exactly. Very good. Excellent. Raji, next slide, please.
Hari, anything regarding the abstinence that is you need?
Next slide. Yes, told 3 to 7 days. It's a next slide.
Sir, in some cases regarding the abstinence, in some patients with very poor or oligospermic men, shorter periods of abstinence has been proved to provide better samples. Even 1 day or even some few hours also can give few good samples in such people. So a subset of male patients who might benefit with a shorter abstinence period.
So Ram, how many samples you want to analyze?
Ideally, we will analyze 1 sample first, and if it is within normal range, then nothing much will be done again. We will see at the time of IUI or whether they are conceiving. If the sample doesn't come within the normal range of WHO criteria, then ideally 2 samples, minimum 1 month apart according to ASRM or 2 to 3 months according to spermatogenic cycle.
Very good. It's a valid point in that we shouldn't start counseling a couple with just one abnormal sample, because it can be an error from our side, lab side, or collection error. So many things can go wrong with the one sample. So wait for a second sample, and the duration between the 2 samples differ according to the different guidelines, but most of them preferably over a few weeks. Okay, next slide. There have been salient changes in the WHO reference standards over the years from 1950 to 2010. Dr. Anupama, can you tell us what are the salient changes WHO made in the 2010 guideline?
Yeah, the semen volume, regarding the volume, it has been previously around 2 ml, sorry, and it has been reduced to 1.5 ml. And count also, previously it was, the upper limit was around 20 million per ml. And now it has been reduced to 15, at least 15 million should be there. Then the total sperm concentration per ejaculate, and that also was previously, it was around more than 40 million, should be more than 40 million. Now that has been changed to 39 million. Then motility also, previously around A plus B together, that is progressive motility and slow progressive motility together should be more than 50%. Now it has been reduced to at least there should be 32% A plus progressive motile sperms. Then sperm vitality also, previously around 75%. Now it has been reduced to 58. And morphology gross changes has happened. And previously it was 14. And I think junctions were still somewhere around 80%. And now it has been changed to 4%. And that's a strict criteria. Then leukocytes also, the presence of leukocytes, that was almost the same, around less than 1 million. Now also it is almost less than 1 million. Then one more point I would like to add is we prefer the semen analysis should be done in a standardized lab. And preferably if it is done in an infertility center, definitely we can adhere to the values. Otherwise, we have routinely, what we see in our practices, there are a lot of differences between the values in different labs. So I think, Hari, you can comment on it.
Excellent, Anupama. It's a very good, valid point. If you want to interpret a semen analysis, ideally it should be done in a fertility center rather than a general lab. So even if you have a patient coming with a report, it's it's mandatory for me to repeat the analysis in my own lab. And Dr. Sheila Madam, actually half of the panelists would have done the semen analysis and interpretation after the 2010 WHO that cutoff came, and the other half would have done it before and after the WHO. So as a leading person in this field who has done semen analysis and interpreted it before the WHO criteria and the after that, do you feel this 2010 WHO criteria is beyond criticism?
Sorry, I didn't get the last part.
Do you feel the 2010 WHO criteria is beyond criticism?
No, it's not beyond criticism. I think we all know that, isn't it? Because I think there are lots of criticisms. One was a lot of ethnicity. It was taken only from the Caucasian backgrounds. I think the Asian population was completely, Asian and African population was completely excluded. So that is
China also excluded.
China was excluded. Yeah, that's a big chunk which was excluded. And then these values are actually the 5th centile. Exactly. So again, that was the problem, isn't it? So these two problems, so we know, but they did take all those who had fathered a child, and it was from antenatal clinics. I think husbands attending.
And that's only single semen analysis was
single semen analysis. And I think probably the morphology, they've taken it's probably related to ART. I think that probably 4% looking for stricter criteria might probably, I don't know how far everybody is following that. Those are the things, even when you say morphology and things like that, isn't it? So there are a lot of criticisms, and yeah, you're correct.
You brought up a valid point in the sense, if it's better, it will be better to follow the 50th centile rather than the 5th centile.
Rather than the 5th centile.
Great point. So next slide, please. So coming to a common problem which a patient will come to you, Dr. Krishnadas, a patient coming to you with a semen analysis report, the only problem is liquefaction time going beyond 2 hours. how will you interpret and how will you counsel the patient?
The prolonged liquefaction time still remains a persistent headache in real patients. It might be a temporary phenomenon also. It need not be seen in the repeat analysis that you do. But yes, if you got a persistent liquefaction time problem, you will have to evaluate for causes. Look for pyospermia that might be coexisting with it. And if that is not so, which is seen in most of the cases, it could be, you could counsel the patient that it could be due to an inflammation of the accessory sex glands. But whatever said and done, you need to make sure, you need to have a repeat sample, make sure that the infection is still a problem. How do you counsel the patient? Well, it's a tricky situation. You have to take them into confidence, show them that it's really a problem, and then tell them about the difficulty that they might face during attempting a natural conception with a sample with a prolonged liquefaction time. If that is the option, then you need to counsel them regarding further options of how to have mechanical liquefaction being attempted, and then using that sample to proceed with an intrauterine insemination or likewise. Simultaneously, to buy the confidence of the patient and also to attempt any medical remedy that might be possible, you might as well treat them with agents that might promote liquefaction.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Krishnadas in that this is not a bigger problem, but patients are concerned.
Yeah.
So we can actually tell them that as such, this liquefaction time delay or even a high viscosity will prevent us from doing the further analysis of further parameters. That's the most important thing, rather than having any clinical significance other than the accessory gland infection.
Correct.
Great. So coming to the volume, Krishnadas, can you tell us the importance of having a low volume semen?
Well, to call it as being hyperspermic, you need to have less than 0.5, but any value above 1 ml, if the patient comes with a report that and they say that they're concerned about a volume at a seminal analysis showing just 1 ml, I think you should be able to reassure them. Most common cause could be a frequent ejaculation for a low volume ejaculation. More serious causes could be something like an obstruction, which a partial retrograde ejaculation, a CBAVD, that could also be attributable. But yes, a low volume ejaculate, persistent low volume ejaculate could be a cause for infertility. Most often, you could, but people do seem to conceive even with a low volume ejaculate. It's not that, finding a low volume ejaculate will rule out a natural conception. And you might have to even rely upon pooled samples if the volume is too less.
Exactly, Krishnadas. Here, problem is, this is the parameter which comes at the top of the analysis report. So people are fixated with this and they want to answer. So I think most common cause is the collection problem, partial collection. So we can actually reassure them. And if it is persistent, we might have to think about some obstruction somewhere down the line. Okay, next slide, please. So Preeta, do you want to comment on an acidic semen sample? Dr. Preeta?
Yeah.
Around?
Yeah. Basically, acidic, whether it is acidic or alkaline, doesn't matter much. If it is acidic, we have to suspect some infection like prostatitis or something, because acidicity is because of the prostatic gland, and alkalinity is because of the other one. So if there is no balance between the acidic and prostate gland secretion and the seminal vesicular fluid, then there can be a change in the acidity. But it doesn't matter much if there is some infection and you control the infection. I think acidity or the pH is not a big factor in the semen analysis.
Do you find patients who want to understand each of these parameters and will question you regarding this? Do you come across?
We have to give a after the semen analysis, we have to give a conclusion.
We are bound to tell them what each parameter means, because we only ask them to check. Now, Preeta, you can't go now because you are the one who flies between the lab and the theater. So what about the agglutination of the sperms? What is your take on the sperm agglutination? Is it
One-
significant?
It is significant actually. Basically, one thing is that we have to distinguish between agglutination and aggregation. Most of the time, the laboratory will give agglutination as a report, and basically it might not be agglutination, it might be just aggregation. Aggregation is basically it can be because of some artifact in the semen sample, or some more leukocytes or something like that. But agglutination is something which is important. When you're suspecting anti-sperm antibodies, then agglutination is a live sperms which are coming together. It will be motile. It can be head-to-head or tail-to-tail agglutination. If you are seeing agglutination, you have to think of anti-sperm antibodies. You have to treat the condition, like whether you have to suspect infections, you have to suspect inflammation, then you have to treat it, and you have to repeat the semen analysis if the patient is not getting pregnant within the meantime.
Okay, so Preeta has concluded that agglutination is different from aggregation. Agglutination is between the motile sperms, whereas aggregation is between the motile and non-motile sperms. It's of less significance. And you have brought up a contentious issue, which I want others to also respond to. Abhishek, Dr. Abhishek.
Hello.
So I want you to comment, scholarly comment on anti-sperm antibodies checking and the treatment as Preeta was mentioning.
So actually nowadays, we don't check for anti-sperm antibodies. It used to be a very common test which was done in the past. But nowadays, we don't really check for anti-sperm antibodies. The reason for this basically being that if they did have anti-sperm antibodies, they would come after a period of infertility. And the treatment for, there's really no treatment for anti-sperm antibodies. Previously, people used to give steroids, and there was various concoctions of things which they used to give for it. But right now, nowadays, if you do suspect anti-sperm antibodies in that event, then intrauterine insemination would be the treatment to go ahead for.
Yes.
Great, Abhishek. Okay, so Biju, Dr. Biju, Dr. Biju around?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, so we have done a semen analysis. So there are inferences at the end of the semen analysis using different terminologies. So what are the different terminologies, just to get the delegates acquainted to the terminology? What are the terminologies which we use for the semen analysis interpretation?
Yeah, routinely, we always, after semen analysis, we have to give, when we give a...
You're not audible enough.
Hello?
Yeah, please.
Hello?
Yeah, please.
Routinely, after semen analysis, we are supposed to give them a diagnosis, or what we are usually we have to put them. Nowadays, what they do is most of the patients themselves, they will Google and they'll put the findings and they'll come back with a diagnosis. So what we do, when if I say oligospermia, that means the sperm concentration is less than 15 million. And when you say astenospermia, that is progressive mortality is less than 2%. When you go for teratospermia, we say it's previously we were taking it as 70% or 80%, but now we say recent criteria is less than 4%. Then azoospermia, absence of any sperms. Then cryptospermia is that we don't see any sperms in centrifuge sample also. Sorry, in the centrifuge samples we get to see the sample. In aspermia there is no ejaculate. And I think I missed. Hello?
Yes, Ram.
Small point. We are all using the terms oligospermia and all, but actually spermia doesn't refer to the number of sperms. Spermia refers only to the seminal fluid. The zoo in the oligozoospermia only refers to the number of sperms. And accordingly, so many people who come read Google and come and they are confused actually.
Okay.
And one
so
more
Ram, you have invited another question. I know you have a stint with the embryology side also. So like, what are you using, a slide or a hemocytometer or a macular chamber to do the semen analysis?
In WHO semen analysis, it is described with the macular chamber, and an improved Newport chamber can also be used. But here we are using a modified cell counting machine or cell counting chamber only.
Okay, you are not using macular.
No, sir. We have a maculates with us, but we are not using it routinely.
Okay, I'll give you an interesting statistics. In a 2011 study, only 23% were using hemocytometer. Rest others were using slides still to do the analysis. And totally 32% ART labs were complying with the reference range. And only 2% were using the strict criteria for morphology assessment. So still we have a long way to go before it gets standardized.
Correct, correct.
So next one, Surji.
One more small thing, sir. Along with the controversies in the latest WHO criteria, as Sheila Madam has mentioned that India and China were not involved, and the morphology has been cut down very low to 4%. Another interesting fact is that the lower amount of volume needed is 1.5 ml, and the lower amount of concentration needed is 15 million per ml, and the lower amount of count in the total ejaculate is 39. Even if you calculate with 1.5 ml, 15 million, it will come to 22.5 million only. It won't be 39.
Exactly, correct.
So coming to the motility, like ma'am, obviously everybody knows what is the normal motility, but I just want your comment on, Dr. Sheila Madam.
Yeah.
Your comment on CASA.
CASA. CASA came with a lot of fanfare, but I think it has not lived up to its name, isn't it? So probably, I think at the moment, there's no definite evidence for using CASA. Probably motility, it would be just, I don't think CASA has got much of a place today.
Exactly. Like now the conclusion is that CASA is...
So many other things, they come with a boom, but then it sort of...
But one good thing was it can be made standardized.
Standardized.
Person-to-person error can be avoided, but it didn't prove to be that useful. Only thing it's better to use the quality control in the lab. It can be used for quality control in the lab.
Yeah, it can be used for it. I forgot to tell that it can be used for quality. And something else, Sadi, morphology, the scope, nobody is using many of these labs, many of the people are still not using, as you said, the strict criteria. That's why you get very high morphology when you get in many people.
Actually, the next question is to you, ma'am. Next slide, please. Next one. Okay. Now, coming to this 4% normal morphology, which stain do you use in your laboratory? I know you needn't know about all the stains used in laboratory, but being an academician, you should be knowing.
Definitely.
What is the stain you're using?
We keep it, but we are routinely using the Papanicolaou stain, but the GIMSA has also been used. That's
okay. Any others using any different stain, Preeta?
I am using Diffuc actually.
Okay, you are using Diffuc. You are using the pre-prepared slide or the?
I am having pre-stained slides as well as Diffuc because if the both the cost is slightly different. So if patient can afford, I will use the pre-stained slides.
Oh, that much difference between the two?
Yeah. Pre-stained slide is around 450 rupees per slide. The other one we can use for quite a number of people.
For 10 patients, 1,600.
Yeah, that's
fine. That's fine. Next one, please.
Yeah.
So now, Suryak, how will you diagnose leukocytospermia, and is it significant in the prognostication?
Actually, to definitely diagnose leukocytosis, we have to even do the culture also for, I think, because routinely when we see every patient will have some amount of leukocytosis mentioned in the semen analysis. But when we go to the strict criteria, at least 1 million cells should be seen in an ml to conclude for leukocytosis. Definitely a test has to be done for leukocytosis. Then only we can identify the presence of leukocytosis. And if you find leukocytosis, I think we have to do a semen culture and sensitivity also to see for the organism which is causing leukocytosis.
Okay, excellent, Surya. The problem is with the, please.
One more thing, we should rule out varicocele also for all these patients also with a routine semen analysis report.
Now, the problem with the leukocytes is, see, both the immature germ cells as well as the leukocytes look similar. So when a
Correct.
patient comes with 10 to 15 pus cells, that's what they report in the lab. Pus cells, actually it should be reported round cells. And when they come, we tend to give them antibiotic, even though most of the guidelines say there's no use of giving. We tend to give, because once we say there's an infection, doctor, you need a treatment. Okay, now once you give, the thing is not going to disappear. So this is a place where I tend to do a culture rather than from the first instance. Okay, you can do your way, no problem. Okay, next. Raji, are you going to do that?
Yeah.
Sure.
So again, infection is another problem. That is, if it is more than 1 million, definitely you have to treat. And so many clinicians have their own different variety of antibiotic, but the studies have shown that there is not much of use of that. And definitely, if it is more than 1000 CFUs per ml, definitely, as Cyriac told, an antibiotic sensitivity test will help you. So coming to the biochemical assays, again, what we are more worried about is the presence or absence of fructose. Yes. Hello. So Biju, can you tell me about this sperm function test, especially DNA fragmentation? Your take on DNA fragmentation. I think all the panelists can comment. Are you doing that?
I'm not doing it.
You're not doing that because you don't believe in DNA fragmentation.
First of all, it's cost-wise, it's more, and whatever the final treatment is, only give antioxidants. That's what I understood. So
what about you, Cyriac, SCSA, SCA?
Yeah, we are doing, but again, this is just to satisfy the patient whether repeated IVF failure. They want to know why failure. They will go on eat your head so much. Then maybe this is one thing, and this is one thing you can do, and say your DNA fragmentation is too high, and this is the cause, and you have to go for donor sperm. So they will never agree for whatever you say. They will eat your head so much. So only that thing.
Preeta, your comment?
That I am doing for repeated IVF failures and all. I'm using SCSA with the Halo test I'm doing. This is basically the indication is what Cyriac was telling. When I'm doing this Halo SCSA test.
And how do you prognosticate the results?
If it is if the DFA is more than 30%, I will tell that your DNA fragmentation index is more. And
you look for correctable factors, as Renu told.
Yeah, sure, we'll do.
Yeah, problem is
I repeat it after 3 months and see whether it is coming down. Most of the time, after 3 months of antioxidant therapy, we are getting a low index also.
Hari?
Less than 15.
The problem is if you do this after a failure of FIXI and you are using your ultimate weapon and still you find failed, and you're giving them an explanation that it's because of the abnormal DFI. So what next for them? Exactly. Antioxidants are all given even prior to the FIXI.
Exactly.
So there's a problem with the DFI and the SCSA. And SCSA is pretty expensive also. How much is it costing you?
Very expensive.
6 to 8,000.
3,000.
Sending it to Dr. Madhubhashini.
Yeah.
Our
Institute Coimbatore.
Doing it in our lab only, sir.
So you're doing it there?
Yes, madam.
It's
What SCD you are saying?
We don't need fluorescent this one for Halo test. We need our
Halo test is fine. Halo test is cheaper also. Halo test is cheaper also. I was asking about the SCSA.
SCSA, no. I am telling Halo test only. SCSA,
okay, you're doing sperm chromatin dispersion is fine. It's cheaper. You can do it in-house. SCSA, you have to send it.
Yeah, that's we need
check whether
analysis.
Yeah, please.
I think it will come around 4,000 rupees maximum, 2,000, between 2,000 and 4,000.
3,000 Halo, it is 3,000 IVF per person because 30,000 is one pack, 10%.
Okay. So, Abhishek, what is your opinion about role of ultrasound in a subfertile male, especially when most of them as the gynecologists don't examine a male patient, and also do you recommend all the ultrasound? Abhishek?
So no, actually I don't recommend ultrasound for everyone.
So you believe in a clinical examination?
I believe in a clinical examination, and that too I do the clinical examination more so if the 7 parameters are not within the normal range. So if they're not in the normal range, after a repeat semen analysis, that's when I usually do a proper physical examination. And if I do find any abnormality, even if it's even if it's a varicocele or any abnormality, then I do an ultrasound for them.
Okay. Anything about the truss? Any indication that is regarding transrectal ultrasound?
Yeah, so this is basically for.
You'd like to do a scrotal ultrasound or a truss?
Scrotal ultrasound. We don't do many trusses actually.
Okay, so there are any other opinion, please?
I think the
Yeah, actually, if the
Madam?
semen volume is low, when you're expecting an obstruction in the genital tract, first might have a value.
Exactly.
Madam?
You know, same thing, scrotal ultrasound, when you want to confirm your findings, you might, but otherwise CBAVD and all these things should be clinical diagnosis. So, and if you suspect a tumor also, otherwise, as he said, when you have a low volume, acidic and fructose absent, probably then you can look for, do a transrectal, but how much it will help you is another thing.
Ma'am, in this era of litigation,
yeah.
you miss out a tumor.
The tumor, yes, I do agree.
No, we can miss it because urologists can miss a tumor, and we get so many reports of microlithiasis.
So are you, yeah, microlithiasis, we get so many reports. So are you advocating scrotal ultrasound, Hari?
Absolutely no, ma'am. But like in the era of litigation, we have to be cautious.
Yeah, it's very difficult because they're very small tumors also, isn't it? Sometimes
exactly.
Testicular tumors, yeah, and 1% of truss, yes, same indication. EDO, if you're going to be corrected, fine, but otherwise, again.
Hello.
Yes, EDO, if you're suspecting, I mean, if proud to identify the ejaculatory duct obstruction, you can do a truss, but again, I mean, if you're surgical correction and all, then it might be useful. Exactly.
Yes, madam. Exactly. That is what the point, because last time we got a patient with an ejaculatory duct obstruction and we did a PISA and all, but the urologist was telling if it was an EDO, that is an ejaculatory duct obstruction, they can do a simple procedure of transurethral resection of this ejaculatory duct, and you can have a normal, ejaculate. You can have a normal ejaculate. Okay.
Yeah.
So.
It all depends.
It depends on
the urologist or gynecologist.
Exactly.
Okay, Hari, about the
it's reassuring to know that it's such a simple surgery. I didn't know that.
Urologist, for the urologist who is doing a TURP routinely, routinely.
Yeah, correct.
So, after all the basic tests, coming to some specialized tests, Anupama, like when do you want to do an hormonal assessment for an infertile male? Dr. Anupama?
Yeah, definitely the normal hypothalamic pituitary this testicular axis is very important in males, especially those with the hypogonadotropic features of clinical examination and other things are in favor of hypo. Definitely we have to do the hormonal evaluation. Similarly, in azoospermia also hormonal evaluation carries an importance. Otherwise, we won't routinely do hormonal evaluations in male. With mild OAS or something like that, we won't routinely do. If the semen analysis shows that the count is less than 10 million or something like that, and those with any sexual dysfunctions also, it has the evaluation of endocrinological evaluation carries importance. Definitely in those with normal spermatogenesis, definitely there is no role in doing all these hormonal tests. And if you're suspecting any features of hyperprolactinemia, like hypergalacturia or something like that, definitely prolactin evaluation can be done. And also definitely in hypo also, definitely FSH and LH can be done. And FSH and LH will be definitely low in those group of people. And at the same time, testosterone will also be low, whereas the prolactin part will be normal. Then those with any abnormal spermatogenesis, FSH can be either high or it can be normal. Then LH can be normal and others will be normal. Then when we are suspecting a complete testicular failure or something like that, definitely all these values will be high, especially FSH and LH, and the testosterone will be either low or just below the normal limit, or then prolactin will be normal. Then, of course, prolactin secreting tumors, if you are suspecting something like that, definitely the prolactin evaluation carries importance, and that will be high also. Then endocrine, sorry. Then FSH, if the FSH level is more than 8 or something like that, we have to suspect some testicular failure. Then if it is more than 12, definitely problems will be there. And we have to counsel the patient. And actually, the previous speakers were telling that even normal FSH is not a guarantee to normal spermatogenesis. And raise in people with a normal FSH, we can find abnormal semen parameters. And similarly, in those with the raised FSH, we have seen subtle areas of spermatogenesis as per the testicular aspirations. Then,
so how many of you believe in FSH? Because Sunil Jindal sir was telling that he don't believe in FSH at all. Okay. So the esteemed panelists, please comment on FSH values.
Initial minimum endocrine evaluation should include only a total testosterone and FSH according to ASRM practice committee guideline. If there is a reduction in the total testosterone level of less than 300 nanogram per ml only, you have to do free testosterone and prolactin and LH. And you can rule out thyroid problems also. Inhibin has been used, inhibin B has been used as a marker, but only in studies or in research models because it is very costly and very difficult to do. So with the results of all these four, already the flowchart has been shown. You will come to a diagnosis. So initially only do total testosterone and FSH. It is helpful in counseling. It is helpful in counseling only because there have been reported cases of sperm retrieval even with FSH of 40 to 50. But you can tell a patient that if the more the FSH is, the less chances of getting good sperm.
But I think, Reggie, can I say something? I think the
yes,
reverse
madam, please.
The reverse is also true, as you said. FSH is mainly useful in counseling when you have a high FSH. But if you have a normal FSH also in azoospermia, that doesn't guarantee. You must tell them it might not guarantee, because you can get maturation arrest even with a normal FSH. So I think mainly for counseling.
It was an excellent discussion. As to summarize, actually we have to do an FSH and testosterone in select setting where you have an oligospermia or a sexual dysfunction or you suspect an endocrinopathy. And if these are abnormal, you have to go for some specialized testing like free testosterone, which they specifically say the sample has to be collected between 8 and 10 in fasting. So probably you have to adhere to those guidelines. And as Ram was telling, inhibin is an expensive tool, but it's more, actually it's better marker. And a large American study gave 7.6 as a cutoff for FSH sometime back. And probably that's a too low value to rely on. See, that's why 12 might be an ideal value to make our decisions based on. Okay, next slide.
A TE ratio, I think already Venu has discussed about the genetics.
TE ratio, I just wanted to listen. Anybody is giving anastrozole, any of the panelists can respond. Anastrozole in the dose which the European study says every 6th hourly you have to give.
1 milligram Q 6th hourly.
1 milligram.
Nobody's giving.
Nobody's giving.
Ram is giving.
No, sir, we are giving testosterone, but not in the EU dose. We are giving it only 1
daily.
One daily only.
Exactly.
It has been shown to improve the TE ratio and the sperm counts, but the pregnancy rates are not seem to be improving that much.
Though anecdotal, we had pregnancies, but it's anecdotal. We can't take it for granted.
So regarding genetic screening also, I think already the KJK sir has discussed. So I'm skipping that slide. About the Y microdeletion also, Jayakrishnan sir has told in detail.
No, I just want to get the panel members who all are doing Y microsome deletion. Please raise your hand.
Sir, in very rare cases, I did my thesis on Y chromosome microdeletion. So I was interested in that under the guidance of Dr. Reddy sir. And it will help you in counseling only. It will help you in counseling regarding the chances of, before planning for a surgical retrieval, if it is complete A Z away or B deletion, then the chances are very negligible. You will get less than 10% chance of getting. In A Z away, it will be Sertoli cell only, and in B, it will be maturation arrest. Only in A Z of C, whether it is partial or complete, it can be hypospermatogenesis, and there is 50 to 60% chances of getting sperm. So it will be helpful in counseling regarding the chances of sperm retrieval, and it will be helpful in counseling that even if we get a sperm and we do ICSI with that, if you are getting a male progeny, he might also be suffering from the same thing and he might be coming to us.
How many of
Great,
our
Ram, great.
I think there are families with all the siblings have infertility. In such situations also it is good.
I think the other question is
please.
how many of our patients will refuse to, I mean, if they say,
Will-
talk about the inheritance,
Yes, to, yeah.
how many of our patients are like-
Exactly, ma'am.
Exactly. So that's the
In
point.
2021, we do have a way to circumvent the Y chromosome microdeletion. Probably next generation will be a
Next
capsule.
generation, correct.
So that is not one to hold back. But problem, this Y chromosome microdeletion is expensive. And based on that alone, can you deny a biopsy? Because Gardner always used to tell, like any patient, even then atrophic disease has the right to undergo a testicular biopsy.
And they
And
feel
Ram was quoting a figure of 10%. 10% is not that bad.
In micro T cell, sir.
micro T cell.
Yeah, fine.
In micro T cell, not normal T cell.
Okay, shall I proceed?
Yeah, sure.
So I think role of testicular biopsy, everybody knows that it's not done nowadays. And I will go to the erectile dysfunction part. That is, and again, any big problem. Suppose the patient is asked to collect and the patient is not having not having erection and all. Krishnadas, I think you are the best person to tell about the different aspects of erectile dysfunction and your practical tips for correcting this ED.
You look at male sexual dysfunction in total, you could probably divide it into erectile dysfunction, libido-related dysfunction, and ejaculated dysfunctions. Well, if you are asking about pure erectile dysfunction, the treatment lies in understanding the cause. Actually, you'll see that real organic causes will contribute only to a real minority, 10 to 15% of the cases. 90 to 95% is actually psychological erectile dysfunction, also more so situational. Could be a primary or secondary to premature ejaculation, which is often not elicited from the patient. So if you have a patient who's got real ED, like in a case you said, where he could not even complete a successful act of collection of a sample by attempted masturbation, then that needs real treatment. But if the patient comes to you, if the patient comes to you in the case of, let's say, a non-consummated marriage, the couple might come to you with the person himself admitting to the fact that he's having ED. But if on interrogation you will find out it's actually vaginismus causing a secondary ED there. There are lots of permutation and combinations.
So you can simplify it, what we can do.
Well, counseling holds the keys. First line, second line, third line is counseling. Only fourth line is medications. Because the options, the therapeutic options you have to play with drugs is minimal. And the higher options are a little interventional kind of, which is not commonly practiced unless you have a urologist handy in place. So coming to the pharmacological methods, after your counseling is done, you start off with the lowest possible dosage of the safest available drug with you. You might stick on to pure allopathy or do a little bit of mixopathy. Vasodilators, probably a placebo effect. But tadalafil is still the starting molecule, first choice molecule. Start in the lowest dose possible.
Can you give it left and right to all patients, or will you do anything?
You need to be careful when you're giving to patients with known comorbidities, like a patient who's a CAD patient, a post angioplasty patient. But even in them, what they say is, if a patient can comfortably climb up 2 feet of stairs, then he should be able to safely tolerate a dosage of up to 20 milligrams of tadalafil with a normal coital act. So yes, you need to take the background history of the patient, assess the comorbidities, and then only start medications as you would do in with any drug. So available with you are tadalafil and sildenafil, left and right, available in the market in various permutations and combinations, alone or in combination with naproxetin or paroxetine. Newer molecules, yes, they came in for a short while. Due to the cost and inaccessibility, they're not rampantly available now. But absolute contraindication, I would say, would be a patient on nitrates or nitric oxide donor molecule. That is the only absolute contraindication. All others are all relative contraindications.
I think we will we have 5 minutes more. I think we'll just rush through the how to manage it regarding the management of subfertility. Sheila, madam, what's your take on lifestyle modifications? What advice you will give to a subfertile male?
Yes, we always think of lifestyle modification for the female, but it's equally important for the male because we get so much of obesity today, isn't it? Overweighted obesity. So definitely, yes, obesity reduction and all the other things, a cessation of smoking, too much of alcohol to be avoided, an occasional drink may be okay, but not more than that. And like heat exposure to the heat. And I'm not so sure about the laptops and things like that, but still, I mean, you can counsel them and then ask them if they are on any other drugs like anabolic steroids, Kautal practices. Yeah, all these things we have to counsel. But I think today our main problem is we're finding more and more of obesity. It's becoming a real problem for us.
So regarding antioxidants, there was a controversial talk and Venu was telling, and this is one of the latest paper which came in March 2020. So this was published in Fertility Sterility, and this was this thing multi-center double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trial, and it was a pilot study also, and they concluded that antioxidants do not improve semen parameters or DNA integrity among men with male factor infertility. So how many of you will agree to this statement, and what's your take on antioxidants? Yes, this is another paper from our own MSK, that is Mohan S. Kamath, which also came recently.
Same thing, no difference.
Panelists, please, antioxidants.
I think we all agree, but we still prescribe.
Rightly said, madam. Hari?
The very logic is you are not going to do much harm. Only thing it will delay the ART procedures in many sick patients.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, so you have to take into account the female age also. She's young, okay, you can give antioxidants and wait for some time for the things to improve.
Correct.
Otherwise.
So what the Cochrane says is there was all low quality evidence studies from 7 small randomized controlled studies, and they had a marginal improvement in the live birth rate. So basically, you are doing no harm. So you are doing something. That feeling is there, but definitely cost factor should be taken into your mind. Okay, and there is a weak evidence to support all these things. So coming to the next thing, that is other empirical remedies. I think aromatase inhibitors we have already talked, steroids, others, and all. What is your comment, Hari?
Yeah, actually, the classic teaching is that only medically treatable condition in male factor is hypogonadotropic hypogonadism, that too with gonadotropins. All other drugs are considered to be empirical, but of late, especially from the Sandro Esteves their group, they started treating with the aromatase inhibitors for the patients with low testosterone estradiol ratio less than 10. Otherwise, it's still, for me, it's gonadotropins only for those indications.
Correct.
Any difference of opinion? Already we have talked about HCG, then converted to HMG or FSH. But all this Esteves group, I think they have gone with once weekly recombinant HCG. Am I right, Hari?
Yeah.
I'm not very sure about that.
They went with once weekly recombinant HCG, that is Ovitril, for 4 to 6 weeks, and then they converted to recombinant FSH. So there is that is the Esteves group, that is the Merck group. Okay, so again another concept is TE ratio and all. We have already covered that. So about the Maggie, what about Maggie treating or not? How many of you are using doxycycline till now? This thing, what is your opinion, Abhishek? What antibiotic? What antibiotic and what is your treatment for Maggie?
So actually, I actually do give doxycycline actually, but
both partners.
Only for the male actually, only for the male partner. But whether I'm not really sure whether it works really. So I think its role would be more appropriate if they have some clinical symptoms or they're actually symptomatic. But
what about cyclical antibiotics? Any other panel members? Cyclical antibiotics, they used to give repeated antibiotics for a month or 2. Any opinion?
Imagine yourself taking doxycycline for
every month.
Okay, this is another new paper which has come down. Usually the recommended drug is either doxycycline or ofloxacin. The treatment varied from 3 weeks to 3 months. Again, they are coming with the lower values. They are the newer, the World Journal for Men's Health are coming with lower values that you don't have 1 million per ml. You can even treat with 0.6 ml and all they are telling. But again, more studies are needed. So coming to the surgical management, we have already told that only is not indicated in normal semen quality, isolated teratospermia or subclinical varicocele, and the treatment should be microsurgical, inguinal or subinguinal repair should be the technique of choice. And what about ejaculatory duct dysfunction? I think KD has already told. What about retrograde ejaculation? Retrograde ejaculation?
To rule out diabetes, and better control of diabetes is very important.
So how will you
post-ejaculate urine analysis and confirm the diagnosis? And if you get enough numbers from the urine, you can centrifuge and use it for ICSI after washing.
ICSI?
IVF according to how many numbers and what is the quality of the sperms which you get.
So how are you going to alkalize?
Soda bicarb or media.
Sodium bicarbonate.
Soda bicarb we have to give before.
Sodium bicarbonate you will be giving.
Yeah,
to alkalize the urine.
Yeah, till the pH reaches a specific value, you can alkalize and ask them to have their tablet and void, have a masturbation, then void the urine and you can collect. Or you can inject some media into the bladder and ask them to, you can look at the post-voidal urine.
Dr. Vaidya, it's time up.
Okay, okay. Hari, any last thing for ART, this thing? One. Hari? I think we are
actually to decide between which route to take IUI, IVF, ICSI, we have to have an idea of the total motile sperm fraction, and depending on that we decide. Any other panelists can contribute.
The total motile sperm wash is less than 1 million for ICSI. 1 to 3 or 1 to 5 you can do a IVF. More than 5 or more than 3, some studies have quoted you can do IUI.
Okay, good, Ram. That is fine, but you do most of the cases ICSI, no?
Yes.
No ICSI for all. Nothing like that.
No, it's not for all. It's for most.
ICSI for
Most.
IVF or ICSI? IVF or ICSI?
According to the count, if it is more than 1 to 3, we will do IVF only. If there is a repeated IVF failure or if there is a repeated pregnancy loss with that IVF only, we will convert it to ICSI.
Sheila ma'am, do you prefer to do all ICSI, all IVF, or share of IVF and ICSI?
Unfortunately, I would prefer to do a share of IVF and ICSI. It's not always possible, to be very frank. But sometimes we do half-half, but most of the time it eventually practically it happens to be all ICSI, even though I'm not very happy with it.
I have the same opinion of ma'am. Usually the decision will be taken by the embryologist and all. So,
Hari, can we conclude because
Sure,
so I would like to thank Dr. Sheila Madam, Dr. Biju, Dr. Preeta, Dr. Krishnadas, Dr. Ram Gopal, Dr. Abhishek, Dr. Siriak, and Dr. Anupama for the wonderful for wonderfully participating in this panel, very actively participating in the panel. And my friend Hari, yes.
Yeah, can I ask something?
Yes,
yeah,
just
since we started doing like previously mentioned, very less people do morphology. Of late, we also started doing morphology for all the patients, and we find that very few patients have normal morphology.
Normal morphology.
Morphology has become very low. So, what is all of your opinion to improve the morphology? Because patients are worried.
It's rather than improving, we have to select the best ones. That's all we can do because it's a genetic trait.
Yeah.
And if there is any correctable factors, you can correct like a varicocele or something like that.
Morphology.
This is another stress.
And will you go for a testicular sperm?
No. Morphology at least one.
Actually, we have tried doing study, very limited number in between testicular and ejaculated sperm in the same patient. Not much of difference, but literature says in cases where there is severe dysfunction, testicular sperms might prove better than the ejaculated ones. But we didn't find that with a very small number.
Can we wind up? Thank you all the panelists. Thank you, Hari, especially within short time. I think he helped me. Thank you, Dr. Punyamoideen, for this opportunity, for giving this opportunity to to conduct this panel. I think being a coordinator, I'm very happy that this all went well. And I would thank Dr. Sunil Jindal, Dr. Jayakrishnan, Dr. Venu for their excellent talks, and the chairpersons, especially Lalitambika Madam, Dr. Kavita, Dr. Anita Madam, Dr. Bimal, Dr. Sadi Madam, and Dr. Kavita. I think it was very good, and it was very informative. Hopefully, we'll get the feedbacks from Punyamoideen, who is the chairperson of the Reproductive Medicine Committee. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Reggie, for that wonderful coordination of this CME program by getting so many faculty and the topics streamlined. And a few days back, we were very apprehensive that the registrations were not coming into that much number as expected. But by now, when we are closing down the CME, the registrations have reached up to 288. And that's really a good number. But the registrations from outside Kerala was very good in number when comparing to that from Kerala. So that is the registration feedback, and the discussions all were really helpful, and the recordings also will be published soon. And this is the first of its attempt by the Reproductive Health Committee by organizing a series of 3 CMEs. And the next will be conducted on the next Saturday, the same time, 5 to 8 p.m. And that will be coordinated by Dr. Raju. And I'm really thankful to Sun Pharma, who has supported this event, and the Medcom events for providing this platform and all the promos and the materials. So I thank, once again, I thank all the faculty and delegates, and a special thanks to Dr. Reggie. Thank you.
Thank you and good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, sir.
Good night. Good night.
Good night. Good night.
Good night. Bye.
Bye, madam. Bye, Abhishek. Pinna jana.
Bye, bye. Madam,
Thank you, Reggie and Hari.
Bye.